Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So want to go ahead and do something a little bit different here. It's Tuesday. It's the middle of the week. We're going to start looking ahead to week 10 here in college football in just a matter of hours, really, as we get set for an exciting weekend ahead. But I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about a team that, frankly, everybody in the media, and I include myself, I'm guilty of this, have not talked about nearly enough and, frankly, have not shown enough respect to, and that is the BYU Cougars. By the way, BYU fans, if you are watching, make sure to follow our Torres on BYU page, all sorts of late-breaking BYU news. And it's funny, right? Because we talked a lot about BYU basketball over the course of the summer. By the way, my official first trip to the Marriott Center is booked. I will be at a game in February. Cannot wait. But listen, we cover college football here, too, on the Aaron Torres pod. And I've been as guilty as anybody of focusing on the Bamas, the Texases, the LSUs, the whoever, and not enough on a team that is 8-0, is in position to play in the Big 12 championship game. Nothing's been clinched. I'm not putting the cart before the horse, but they are in great position to play for a conference championship. And if they play for that conference championship, they are going to be in the college football playoff. It is time to show some BYU some respect. Excuse me. So let's go ahead and dive into who they are, what they're about. And first of all, let me just say this, is that, on the one hand, I sort of get why they kind of flew under the radar coming into the year, right? Over-under win total was 4.5 wins coming into the season. They were picked to finish 13th in the Big 12. But what I'll also say is, by the way, this is not a BYU thing. Kind of just shows how dumb preseason polls are, right? And I get why we do them. I get that, one, fans just love them and they consume them, and it's something to talk about in July and August. It really is not a reflection at all of who teams are. And you can look, nationally, Florida State, preseason top 10 team. That was based entirely off of last year, and they're 1-6, and they're a dumpster fire. By the way, in the Big 12, a lot of the same. Arizona, preseason top 25 team. They have not been good. Oklahoma State have not been good. Kansas have not been good. But I think that's part of the reason that we just don't give BYU enough respect on a national level, is because the polls told us that they weren't going to be very good and that whatever. And so the second that they start winning, that they start having success, one of two things happens. One, either they're not that good and whatever, or two, the teams they were playing were just overrated and whatever. But it just shows how silly the system is. I get why we do it. Picked to finish 13th. By the way, the Colorado Buffaloes were picked to finish 12th in the Big 12. So clearly whoever was voting in the Big 12, and I'm not picking on anyone specifically, just had no great feel for who these teams were coming into the year. But as I look at BYU, again, people want to disrespect. People want to say they're not this, they're not that. Like, I just look at the facts, okay? And the facts are they're not only 8-0. Here's the thing. They have some really nice wins on the schedule. Like, it's not like they haven't played anybody. Go all the way back to the beginning of the season. Probably the first sign we should have had that this team was probably a little bit underrated back in week 2. They played SMU at SMU. They end up winning that game. And like everything else at the time, what does it mean? Is SMU this? Is BYU that? As it turns out, SMU is a really good football team. SMU since that game has not lost a single game the rest of the season. SMU is 7-1 right now. They themselves are in the conversation for the ACC championship game. Now, they don't play Miami or Clemson, so they're going to need some help along the way. They play Pitt this weekend as well. But the bottom line is SMU 7-0 in games that they've played that did not feature BYU. So they take care of SMU, get into league play, they start winning, and then obviously the signature win since then is the Kansas State game. Watched that game, was hosting Fox Sports Radio. It was one of the craziest games that I've ever seen. I think the stat was, and BYU fans, correct me if I'm wrong, what was it? From the 2-minute mark of the end of the second quarter to the 10-minute mark at the end of to start the third quarter. So 7 minutes of game action. BYU puts up 31 points, just an insane run. I believe there was a punt return for a touchdown. There was a turnover return for a touchdown. And so you talk about another great win. And Kansas State, by the way, only one loss all year. So that tells you everything you need to know. Two top 20 teams that are a combined 14-1, 13-1, whatever it is, outside of games that they played BYU. Couple other nice wins along the way. And I think watching them, what stands out is a couple things. First of all, they just play a fun brand of football. I mentioned a minute ago the tripping up the Kansas State game and the turnovers that they forced, et cetera, et cetera. Well, BYU third in the country in total turnovers forced, 18 on the season. That's smart, opportunistic football. You can't hate on that. Jake Retzlaff, I think, has been one of the really, really fun players to watch in all of college football. Getting better over the course of the year, certainly stepping up from a season ago when he did play a little bit. But this is a guy, 1,800 yards passing, 18 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. LJ Martin's coming on in the run game. But beyond that, here's the other thing, is that if you actually just sit there and watch BYU, and I'm not saying I'm an expert, and I'm not saying I have all the answers, I'm not saying I can break down what they did on third down that led to this, and this is why they did. But the bottom line is just watch them. They're just such a fun team to watch play. We all saw the fake field goal the other day, which is one of the wildest plays that I've ever seen. I saw that blow up on my social media timeline all day Saturday in the UCF game. You go back to the Arizona game. You have the throwback that ends up being a touchdown pass from the wide receiver. Was a great play. They had a couple really nice turnovers forced. That sick interception guy jumped whatever. So the point I'm trying to make is they're winning. They play a fun brand of football. And lastly, let me say this. College football fans, you might as well embrace it. By the way, I should even mention that UCF game was over, right? Because the UCF game was the one where it's like, okay, this is a team we got to start paying attention to. Let's see what they're all about. They go down to Florida and just destroyed UCF, almost 500 yards of total offense. Final score 37-24. If you watch the game, it was all BYU blue in that stadium by probably the middle to the end of the third quarter. And it was just complete domination. By the way, it was such a bad performance by UCF, they fired the defensive coordinator after that. So that shows you what BYU is doing to teams. And let me just kind of wrap by saying one last thing about this team is if you love them, you hate them, you haven't thought about them before today, don't tell me they're underrated. One, they've beaten everybody on their schedule. They have 2 great wins against 2 teams that have not lost in the games outside of playing BYU. But then 2, just be ready. Because I think this team is playing for a Big 12 title, okay? Again, don't want to put the cart before the horse. Don't want to get blamed if something weird happens. It's not Torres' fault. But here's the bottom line. Just look at the schedule. With 4 games left, here is who is on BYU's schedule. They have the game against Utah, the big rivalry game. They're off this weekend, I should mention. So BYU is off this weekend. They play at Utah a week from now. Utah, listen, I know I'll get crushed for saying this on a BYU video, but listen, I still believe in Kyle Whittingham. Clearly, the quarterback position is a mess since Cam Rising got hurt, but BYU is going to be favored comfortably in that game. Then you have Kansas. Sorry, Kansas stinks. 2-6, 1-4 in the Big 12. They don't get a lot of pub, but you could argue they're one of the more disappointing teams in college football this year. You got to go to Arizona State. I actually think Arizona State's kind of good. I think Kenny Dillingham's quietly done a pretty good job with that program as they sit at 5-2 at this point in the season. But you go to Arizona State in what will be a big game for them, but it's kind of an interesting spot for Arizona State because they're coming off a game against Kansas State a week before that. So you talk about a tough spot. You got to play Kansas State at home. Then you come home to play BYU in late November. And then finally, you do have the game against Houston to end the regular season. Houston, another team that isn't very good this year. And so you look at the standings in the Big 12. The bottom, 6 teams in the Big 12? There's, let's see here. There's 7 teams that are 2-3 or worse in league play. BYU's still got to play 3 of them. So the reality is they are in great position. Again, not putting the cart before the horse. Got to win out. Iowa State's undefeated. Kansas State's an interesting spot. Colorado isn't that far behind. Colorado would need a little bit of help. But all I'm saying is you better get used to it. Pay attention to this BYU team because, listen, we're going to the 12-team playoff era. The Big 12 will get an automatic bid in this thing. And BYU, if they win it, or Iowa State or Colorado or K-State or whoever, is going to be in this playoff. So show BYU some respect. They deserve it. They play a fun brand of football. As I said, Jake Retzlaff, I think, is one of the more underrated players in college football. And I'm just not going to blame a team for absolutely destroying pretty much everybody that they've played. They took care of business against UCF. Cannot wait to see them a week from now against Utah. By the way, if you enjoyed this video, do me a quick favor. Make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New clips and videos going up every single day. Normally go live every Tuesday afternoon. There were some technical issues today. So make sure you're subscribed. We go live 3 times a week, plus clips, plus videos, plus shorts, whatever. Make sure you're subscribed to our Torres on BYU Twitter page as well. We have a great intern, does an incredible job helping me run that page. And as I said, cannot wait to get out to BYU for a basketball game this winter.